Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be getting started in a few minutes. In the meantime, as you see the scroll of quotations across the screen, try and think of any organizational challenges you are currently facing and how these might relate to those challenges. And we will be back in a few minutes to start the webinar. Thank you. Hello again, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We are ready to start today's webinar. And today we'll be talking about how to solve leadership challenges, and we'll be sharing success stories from Fortune 100 companies. We'd like to start with a poll today and ask everyone participating, what intrigued you most about the webinar today? So the companies, the products, solutions on applications, or the success stories? And you should see those options to choose from right now within the poll, and we'll see the results come up in a minute. Okay, thank you for participating in the poll. It looks like overwhelmingly the success stories were what was of interest today for most of you participating, and then also the solutions on the applications followed up by products and companies. A few logistics before we get started today. We do have a lot of people on the call today, and in an effort to avoid any background noise, we have placed everyone on mute. That being said, we do want to give each of you the ability to ask any questions that come up during the presentation. So there is a question pane in the webinar panel on the right-hand side of the screen where you can enter your questions. We have left some time for questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to type them in as they come to you, and we will do our best to answer them all. Finally, we have added this presentation into the handout section of the webinar panel, as well as some of the brochures that cover the topics we'll be talking about today. Be sure to download those now if you haven't done so already. And we will also be recording this webinar, and we will make that available in the Learn Center of our website and on our YouTube channel for any colleagues who are unable to attend or who might be interested in seeing the live version at another point in time. For those of you on the line that are new to MHS, I'd like to give you a little bit of background information about the organization. So Multi-Health Systems is a global publisher of scientifically validated assessments in the clinical, education, public safety, and talent assessment markets. We are located in Toronto, Canada, and have been in business for over 30 years. In the talent space, we are most widely known for our work on emotional intelligence, specifically the EQI 2.0. Being a thought leader in the talent assessment market, we look to expand our solution set, and that led to the most recent chapter as a company with the acquisition of DLI, Discovery Learning International. DLI was a boutique assessment and training company based in Greensboro, North Carolina. And with MHS and DLI solutions now aligned under one organization, we have expanded our leadership development assessments to include a focus on not only emotional intelligence, but also on change style, influence style, and decision making. To further support development, we have also added a number of simulations that then provide a safe environment for leaders to practice these critical skills. David will be talking more about that in a few minutes, and he'll be able to provide some real-world client examples as well as outcomes. Before we get started, a little bit of background information about David and myself. I know from working with David in the past that a lot of clients always give great feedback in terms of the knowledge and experience that David brings. This started back when David acquired his master's degree in communication studies with a focus on organizational leadership behavior. David acquired his expertise and interest in leadership while working in the television, service, and educational industries with positions at CBS, ESPN, ISU, and Nordstrom, just to name a few. In addition to holding a full-time faculty position for over a decade with the Center of Creative Leadership, David is the principal consultant and owner of the Leadership Insight Group and a master trainer with MHS for a number of the assessments and simulations that we'll be talking about today. Now, some of the clients that David has worked with in the past include Bank of America, Dell, Google, HP, Microsoft, and PepsiCo, to name a few. And since the beginning of his professional career, David has designed and delivered work in the areas of leadership and executive team development, talent management, influence strategies, blended learning, competency mapping, as well as other solutions that fall under that talent assessment space. Myself, I've been involved in the talent assessment industry for about 15 years now, and as a partner relations consultant with MHS, I'm helping our clients better understand the solution sets we have and how those relate to their organizational objectives. Okay, we are ready to get started, and I'm going to let David start to talk about some of the success stories that he'd like to share today.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Jason. Always fun to have some technical challenges along the way, which is part of this particular webinar experience for some of these clients that we'll be talking about. As you can see on the screen, Google and many others that have been able to participate in a wonderful journey that I've been on. Nonetheless, I am excited to be with you. Thank you very much for your time that you've been able to kind of engage with us this day for a little bit of your day. We're going to be talking about change and influence and decision making that says on the screen. As we kind of move the slides forward, you'll see the first contact will be Google, and we'll be able to move forward with the Department of the Interior and Dell, Bank of America, and many other financial institutions that I've been fortunate to work with here. So let's jump into this, and let's get into our first story, which would be with Google. And as you see Google and everyone coming up there. So this was a very, very fascinating experience for me personally. This was a situation where 20 years ago, none of us have ever heard of Google. And now it's, 20 years later, and who cannot live without Google? They are the organization that organizes the world's information and makes it universally accessible and useful. The founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, were focused on how can they capture the talent that they have out there in the world, harness that talent, that intellectual capital, and keep that talent on their campus in Palo Alto and then obviously globally. And interestingly enough, they decided, well, let's make sure that we take care of our staff. Let's think about the food. Let's think about the different needs that they have. And as things kind of have grown over the last couple decades, Google has been challenged with thinking about, do we need to provide every single imaginable food option available? They have customized chefs that make anything that a team member wants. The idea is if they can stay there and enjoy staying there, that Google is going to be able to organize the world's information more effectively. So the Google folks were challenged in that as they kept growing and growing and growing, one of the challenges was, can we offer food and all the many, many amenities to everyone all over the world with anything that they want, which was kind of their thinking. We want to not just provide great food service, but above and beyond exceptional food service. So our team members don't even have to think about food or any other human need that they need. They can just focus on Google. Well, as reality has set in, time has taken place, and the question has surfaced, are we being a little indulgent? Are we perhaps providing too many options to our Google team members? What could we do maybe differently? And the opportunity to think about change and challenge that initial founding cultural norm was born. Google reached out and decided to work with the Change Style Indicator, a tool that really looks at how you manage and lead change interpersonally, how you navigate the challenges, the emotions, the dynamics, the preferences, all around that. And this being a core cultural issue for Google, it was definitely going to be a challenge. So they hired someone from outside, someone from Starwood, big company there globally, came in, worked with the team, and decided to think through how do we want to approach this. So the Change Style Indicator, let me jump into that, a little bit of information for those that are not familiar with that particular tool. It looks at a particular continuum of change style preferences. The best way perhaps to kind of explain this, and perhaps you've seen this before, so I'm assuming we have some pretty savvy staff and folks on the line here, is I'd like for you to take a pen, if you have it available, and a piece of paper handy, something, if you will, to write with. And what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to sign your name. Sign your name 3 times as quickly as you can, just like you're signing a check. First, last name. If you happen to be with someone next to you, show them. See if they can interpret what you just wrote, whatever that might be. Now, after you've signed your name 3 times as quickly as you can, what I'd like for you to do is take that pen, transfer it to your other hand, and yes, sign your name 3 times as quickly as you can. And what does it feel like? What are your thoughts out loud? What are your reactions? Possibly awkward, uncomfortable. It takes more time. It's not that easy. And so the idea here is that is a go-to preference. And when we launch into the idea of personality preference tools, or in this case, this particular one that looks at change style, we want to be clear on what is a leader's go-to preference. This conserver, pragmatist, and originator that you see on the screen is tied to that handwriting scenario, that example there, where there is a preference that you have to and do to prefer to lead with. But at times, the environment will require you to behave and adapt and pivot differently based on the interpersonal clues and cues that you are in the midst of. And so Google was trying to figure out a way as to how we could leverage all of these preferences for all the team members globally, as they would be having a personal impact with how they engage with their food amenities, basic needs, but they have a little bit of higher expectations than just making sure they get coffee and some scrambled eggs. I mean, they have a little bit of a higher expectation around quality. So how could they, this team in charge of the food division of Google, do that? And so to better understand that, you have to better understand the assessment. So we had them all take the assessment. And as an example, this is not their actual result, but on the next slide, you'll see an example of a team. And this team is indicative of many teams that are out there. But you'll see on a continuum where different names are mentioned. This was a group I worked with in Australia, a large transportation company, and they were able to understand where their team members were. It helped them to better understand and appreciate what they bring to the table, what they value. The conserver, the pragmatist, and the originator are all different styles. Just to give you a little more background on what these styles are, and obviously taking the assessment gives you much more insight, but the next slide kind of talks about the conserver approach, or the conserver style is the one that really enjoys reflecting on the past. They accept the current structure as is. They prefer looking at change not as something that they need to change, but they like to fine-tune. It's a focus on quality, incremental change. They're not against it, but they want to reflect on what has been happening in the past traditionally, and what could we learn from the past to then apply to the present and the future. You compare that to the originators, the complete, if you will, other end of the continuum, where the originator style prefers to challenge the structure. They say, well, the reason it's not working is we need to start all over from scratch. They prefer change that is expansive. they really are on the extreme end, and there's a continuum where there will be others that will be even more extreme than they are, depending on where they fall on the continuum. But so the third style is the pragmatist approach, and they are literally grounded in the present. What is practical? What is real? What is something that is functional? What makes sense? And so these styles are always happening in organizations, and at Google they were playing out even on the food team. And as the food team reflected, they started to think through, how will we craft a strategy using this information to reach out to all the Google team members globally? So we communicate in their preferred language, just like you signed your name with your preferred hand. And so they had to adapt their message. They had to think through differently. So conservators reflecting on the past, pragmatists in the present, and the originators in the future all bring value to the table. This assessment, the change style indicator, helped them uncover what that unique value niche was. Now, I'm curious, from your vantage point, maybe what you think your change style preference is as you're kind of reflecting on this particular slide and these slides that we've been going through. The next slide has a little poll for you. Curious what we have maybe on our webinar here. What do you think your change style preference is? Conservator, pragmatist, originator? So as we open this poll up, give you a chance to think through just a brief overview. I know you haven't really taken the assessment. You don't have a clear sense maybe of what it is. I do want to emphasize there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. All of them are valuable. The question is, what is your preference? Knowing that you can and do all of these, but that there is one that is your go-to preference when you are managing and experiencing change. So as you all kind of make a selection there, conservator, pragmatist, originator, let's see what we have from a poll standpoint. So it looks like we have a little more on the heavy end of the pragmatist, some more originators, and then there's some conservators. This is a globally used assessment, and the data that has been compiled over the decades for this particular tool, being a valid and reliable psychometric assessment, is that 50% of the users report being a pragmatist, 25% originator, and 25% conservator. So fairly close, though we have a little bit on the lower end of the conservators that participated in this very quick poll, and you obviously haven't really taken the full assessment. But what this information did, specifically for Google, is it again helped them to think more strategically about how they would approach change. The food members that are ones that prefer the conservator approach, they're going to immediately speak up and say, well, you know, Larry Page said and Sergey Brin said that if we don't take care of our people, and this is how we need to take care of our people. And then the originators on the food team would say, well, granted, but life moves, things happen, change happens, the market shifts, and we need to think differently, not disregarding Larry Page and Sergey Brin and what they've done, amazing things here, but what can we do to build upon that by still honoring the integrity of the cultural formation of Google? And then the pragmatists on the food team would go back and forth and kind of facilitate. They're kind of like a translator, if you will, and they're able to better bring awareness to the value of the different and three preferences. They're also sometimes stuck in the middle, the pragmatist approach, where they might be perceived as maybe a little wishy-washy or, you know, not committal to a particular side because they're trying to facilitate all. So it became a very interesting dialogue and an interesting conversation. As you can see on the screen, there's a lot of food that Google does. And so since Google is not in the need to immediately change their food program internally, this is an ongoing process, but they are definitely moving steps forward to address this cultural challenge that they're facing. So that's a success story from Google. They are able to have a much more crafted, successful strategy because of the use of the change style indicator. But let's turn the page to another story, and this next story is going to be a completely different context. This is going to be the Department of the Interior of the United States of America. And this was a very fascinating experience that I've had just in the last year. I've been fortunate to work doing leadership work for the Department of Interior, a lot of times at Yosemite National Park with superintendents and leaders of rangers and so on for the staff. And what was going on specifically at Yosemite as compared to, say, Yellowstone, again, one of the largest parks, and the many others that are out there, Yosemite was going through some major change. And we're not talking just there's a new president, new administration, new Department of Interior. That's enough change in and of itself. But that the hospitality organization, and again, this is all public, Delaware North is the company. They took over from the Curry family of 100 years, who had the hospitality for like 80 years. If you've ever been to Yosemite. And Delaware North decided, I think we can copyright the names of Yosemite National Park. So if you've ever been to Yosemite, beautiful place. I highly recommend. I grew up a couple hours from it. Highly recommend you go there someday if you haven't already. But you might have heard of this place called the Ahwahnee Hotel. And so Delaware North copyrighted the name Ahwahnee Hotel. And so they started to copyright the name Yosemite National Park. And they took over Curry Village. So they started taking over the actual naming rights of the park. And if you go to Delaware North, you can buy merchandise owned by Delaware North that has these trademarks. So obviously this became a little bit of a conflict with the Park Service, the Department of Interior, Delaware North, hospitality, all of that. And so Delaware North is no longer the hospitality organization for Yosemite. Aramark has now stepped in, is leading the charge there. But meanwhile, what do? Since you now don't own the ability to actually name what you thought was always going to be named, Yosemite National Park or whatever. And so Yosemite National Park staff said, all right, well, we'd like to still use our names. And then Delaware North said, well, you can do that, but it will be, $50 million or approximately that. And then the government said, well, we don't have the money to fight that. And so what they have chosen to do is saying, instead of paying $50 million, is they decided to pay $7 million, and they changed all the names in the park of Yosemite. It's now called the Majestic Hotel versus the Ahwahnee Inn. It's called Half Dome Village versus Curry Village, among other things. So if you go there, you'll just see signs attached to other signs with these new name changes. So talk about, change from a cultural long-term perspective where people are passionate about this and all that's going on. So went in and had them take the change style indicator coupled with a couple simulations and 360 assessments, among other things that they were involved in. And they became aware of where they are on that continuum with the change style indicator. They were able to understand why they were maybe more triggered, emotionally challenged, frustrated, unable to become free to think differently. And so there was obviously a lot of venting, which led to using this particular model, which actually is another MHS product called the Change Navigator. And it walks you through how to process change. It's a model here. It says acknowledging, reacting, investigating, and implementing. Any change you go through. I encourage you to think about maybe something you've recently gone through or currently going through, maybe will go through, and it's a change. Maybe it's a new boss, new division, new team that you're going to be working on. Maybe it's a move, and it's impacting you. The first step of change that any organization, any team goes through is they first have to think and acknowledge. So in the upper left-hand corner here, where it says acknowledge, there's a lot about thinking, and it's also focusing on the past. Why? What's going on here? Kind of startled, if you will. Once you go through the acknowledgement stage, then you move to the reacting stage. And these staff at Yosemite and throughout the U.S. who came to Yosemite were definitely in this reacting mode. They didn't understand. They didn't agree. They were confused. They were frustrated. So lots of emotions obviously going on there. This is a critical stage when you're going through change, in that you really need to pause and not rush through this. People will feel disrespected, will not buy in to the change, and sometimes leaders maybe have gone through the acknowledging and the reacting, and they move to what we call step 3, which is the investigating stage. This is where you can either spin out down here in feeling, or say, all right, here's the reality. It's set in. I am now accepting that this is the new normal. It's called the Majestic Hotel, Majestic Inn. No longer the Ahwahnee Hotel after 100 years. Okay, I guess I got it. And so moving into, all right, well, what can we do? How can we leverage that? How can we leverage this change for good? Maybe new marketing, new opportunities, new whatever. And so this particular stage of investigating is the way out, the way to what we call implementing, where you actually secure the change, you embrace the change, you use the change to your benefit. And so these are 4 stages using the thinking, feeling, and the past and the future on those continuums that help individuals, teams, organizations to kind of process whatever change they're going through. There is literally an actual assessment with the Change Navigator that you can actually use. It is geared towards a specific change initiative. So you may be at different stages based on the initiative that you're facing. It's a powerful tool because it really gets into what your preference is in the moment, geared towards that particular change initiative. And then what we did is we complemented that, as we go to the next slide, with the change style indicator, understanding, well, what is your personal preference towards change? And here are some little traps that can play out as you get to know your style. The conservers, as it says here on the reacting, they can get stuck in the past, have difficulty moving forward. The originators, they can originate every single moment of their day if they could. They just come up with idea after idea. And then the pragmatist may get stuck with, well, how do I please everybody? How do I make sure everybody's connected? And so these are things to be aware of, and we made them aware of, self-awareness, to help them understand what they might fall into as far as their own personal traps, as they're not just navigating their self through change, but the people that they're leading and working with. So this was really a helpful tool to get them through it. Obviously, they're not through it completely yet. We went outside, and here's obviously a picture of Yosemite Falls, wonderful place out there. We'd do these simulations, activities, tie in their 360. Leaders would come in, and we'd talk about, what's the impact? What's the impact of being blindfolded, obviously? And are you feeling blindfolded? Were you included in these changes? No. Well, what does that feel like? And what can you do when that happens? And so a lot of application about what to do or what not to do going forward based on the learnings that they're personally experiencing. But having the change style indicator and the change navigator as tools to help them through that process became a very powerful and effective strategy for each of them. So that was Yosemite, and I still encourage you to go, but there's definitely a lot of roads under construction there with all the signage going. I think they might have it on track now, but still an amazing, beautiful place to go. I just had a great time with my family at Yosemite and Yellowstone. Highly encourage you to go. All right, that was the Department of the Interior. Our next story involves the global tech company called Dell, and obviously there's big name recognition for Dell. Michael Dell, creator of this computer company, started out in his dorm room. They were on the top of the world in the late 90s. They were #1. You called them and you customized your own personal laptop, and it worked, and they were able to fill a 747 in Malaysia and fly it overnight, so you could have it FedEx to your house once you ordered it online or over the phone and in your hands within 72 hours. I mean, it was very impressive in the late 90s. Well, the market shifted, and things changed, and Dell lost their number one spot. Michael Dell stepped down, he let somebody else lead, and they decided, well, we don't really want to go into retail because we think we're a little stronger than retail, so they didn't get into Walmart, and basically the competition kind of took them from that slot 1 to the next slot. So this next slide kind of offers a reinvention of where they are and who they are, and one of the things they decided to do was create this particular product, the XPS, but also branch out into other divisions. One of the strategies that they use, and it's been a wonderful 9-year journey that I've been a part of with Dell to help them think through what they can do differently, is we started to do 5-day off-site, really focused on quality, bringing key leaders in and developing their frontline leaders. We do tours of their actual manufacturing. We talk about, how to make sure the packaging goes well. We had all kinds of key individuals that would come in. We had innovation left and right. One guy was known as the bamboo guy, and what he did is he was able to save Dell millions of dollars because he was able to find a way with bamboo packaging that was environmentally friendly, but then was much more reusable, and really turned the company around and had great social presence and positive perception. And so those stories led to, well, what else can we do? So they started to do 5 days, 2 days. We did 1-day programs face-to-face, and they started realizing that, their 80,000 plus organization really is on their computer 80+% of the time. So they're not having many face-to-face meetings. And so they started to think about, well, how can we be more influential? How can we communicate more effectively? And how can we do that with what we're most accustomed to, technology? And so what we designed for them was a 2-part online course that focused on influence. We also had another course using the change style indicator. And so there's a lot of resources, one on conflict, communication, but this one on influence, what we had them do is we had them take the influence style indicator, which is an assessment that helps you better understand, again, your preference, your style towards how you prefer to influence, knowing that you have to influence with many different tactics. You probably maybe have heard the three H's, head, heart, and hands. Influencing through logic, facts, figures, head and the heart, influencing through inspiration, emotions, and then the hands, influencing through collaboration, asking questions, partnerships, and alliances. But this particular assessment took it a deeper dive in that it offered even more information. And so let me give you a little more information about this particular program that we did for Dell and how this particular influence style indicator actually works. So on the next couple slides, what you'll see is we use Adobe Acrobat to deliver this. We had them take the influence style indicator assessment prior to the actual 2.5-hour session. We realized that we could only hold their attention for no more than 2.5 hours online. And these Dell staff were located in far-off countries. We had folks from China and Europe and North America, and they were all connected. And so that's how they do their work. And so they had to figure out how China can influence Round Rock, their headquarters, and the U.S. culture and vice versa. So there's all kinds of interesting cultural dynamics there. But what the influence style indicator does, on this next slide, you'll see that there's 5 styles. And those styles look at rationalizing, asserting, as you see on the screen, negotiating, bridging, inspiring, and you get insight into where you spend most of your time, what's most comfortable for you. Now, obviously, when you're trying to influence someone, you need to know what their desire is, putting yourself in their shoes. At the same time, knowing what your go-to preference is and where you need to shift or pivot your behavior if needed. And then what kind of influence communication strategy do you have? Do you even have one? Or do you just start communicating or overslide the person? We had many conversations of the whole death by PowerPoint. And these engineers at Dell, they just kept thinking more is better. And they would just be so well crafted, the level of detail, but the screen was just covered. I mean, it was just blinding. It was just where do we look? Where do we go? And so Michael Dell said, well, let's start with something like, what's the solution? So the first slide was, what is the solution? So giving people the benefit of the doubt, this is what we're proposing. And then from there, they would start having a conversation about how to get there. And so this influence style indicator would help them explain, communicate the solution, a solution. As you see on the screen here, the inspiring is fully highlighted. And that indicates that this particular profile, which is a sample profile, is where, as you were taking the assessment, inspiring was mentioned the most. You selected that one the most. This particular sample person or individual report is highlighting that. But as you can see, you would have other data with the other 5 styles playing out. Interestingly enough, inspiring was the lowest for Dell. Bridging and rationalizing were the highest. And so as they started to think through, what could we do differently? How can we think about our influencing strategy internally and also externally? And so as we had them take the assessment in the first session, we debriefed the results, and I'm doing it obviously very quickly here with you. And again, you have as one of the handouts an actual sample report of the influence style indicator and the change style indicator for you to kind of get a sense of what you'd actually receive. But we would take those results and then we would challenge them between the first session and the second session and ask them, charge them with thinking through who do you need to influence, who's a key stakeholder, and then have them create a literal relationship map. What are their goals? What are their roles? What do you think their influence style is? What would you actually say to them? What is the business challenge? What are the obstacles? What have you tried? I mean, all kinds of scenarios to get them thinking how to craft that. And then in our second session with the Adobe Acrobat that we used, because it was an easy tool to use, because Dell didn't want to deal with any downloads with different software packages. This one seemed to work in their system, which I highly recommend whatever technology you're using in your own company, best to use that than try to recreate something new. Partner with those organizations in doing that. But Dell and the staff and the individuals and the teams that participated in the training, interestingly enough, started to coach each other. And so we facilitated, what do you all think? What is your impact? What's the perception of this person's strategy? And we would brainstorm, collaborate, come up with solutions, and it really led to some robust discussions about what they can do. And they never even thought of ideas. They never even considered maybe asserting, where they were always rationalizing. And what they would do is maybe pile on more data, which is a part of rationalizing. And they wouldn't think about pushing their ideas forward, or they'd wait, or negotiating, actually giving something up. But they'd always try to maybe bridge, and they'd always kind of almost be a little more too polite at times. But then the inspiring was really vacant. There wasn't as much there. Started comparing Dell to other competitors since they lost their top spot. You know, even started to think about, what does, say, like Apple do? Are they an inspiring company? And what does Dell do? You know, and so it led to some very fruitful discussions that then helped these individual leaders all over the globe think through what they could do behaviorally differently to improve their influence style. So this particular assessment and being able to help them chart a course was a very successful solution that helped them appreciate the insight and gave them tangible ways to move forward and build coalitions and have success. So that's Dell. Interesting experience that is continually ongoing. But what I'd like to do now is kind of end with yet our ending story, our last story here. And this one's a lot of fun. This was a lot of fun for me, and every time I do it, it's a lot of fun. I was fortunate to work with Bank of America and used a computerized simulation, another MHS product called Press Time. And what Bank of America was charged with is they had a lot of millennials and 20-somethings that they needed to develop. And they had to think differently than how they've thought in the past. And so they decided to use Press Time. And what Press Time is, it's a computer simulation. Imagine a room. You can even do this remotely if you wanted to, but 2 laptops, team of 5 to 8. It presents challenges of planning, managing personnel, and managing financial reports, resources. You have to gather and interpret, technical data. You have to address customer and market expectations. You're prompted with scientific research for future development, so there's a lot of information flow. You really have to sharpen your strategic decision making, which was another tool from MHS that we use called the Decision Style Profile. And so being able to help them think through their decision making and how to engage immediately in an environment that is normal for them or typical for them, but was very engaging, led to a lot of powerful insight. I'm always struck with the Press Time, how people just really get into it. And I'm always appreciative of how Press Time works. It's been around for a few decades, and it's got all those little tech kinks out. Not that we didn't have one today. It's all part of reality here. You just kind of have to negotiate and go with it, but which is fine. But this Press Time, I'm amazed at how it works and works well. And all you need is a simple Wi-Fi web link to make it connected. It's all set up. You don't have to download all fancy technology. And in any event, we use this decision style profile, which on the next page is another tool that helps you assess what is your go-to preference again as it relates to making decisions. And as you see on the screen, it says directing, fact-finding, investigating, collaborating, and teaming. All of those styles have value. there is one that most likely you will default to. And as you take the assessment, you get your results compared to a database of over 40,000 that have taken the assessment. And you get to see how your results compare to others. It also gives you insight into maybe what you're overdoing or not leveraging in regards to how you're making decisions. If you're directing, you're doing really the decision making all by yourself. And there are some decisions that you can, and perhaps one could argue should, be made all by yourself as a leader. Then there's the fact-finding. As you can see along the continuum here, there's less inclusion here and a little bit more inclusion. So fact-finding is where you might go on the internet, intranet in your company, might reach out to a few individuals to gather information to find the critical facts that you personally need to then make your decision. And then you would go back and make your decision. Investigating is where you would actually interact with someone, get their input just individually, and then you would go make the decision by yourself. Collaborating is a little farther on the line of more inclusion, where you would reach out to maybe a whole team. Got this challenge team, any thoughts, any opinions, any ideas for me? And then you would go back and make the decision by yourself. The teaming is where you as the leader really take a step down and are on the level playing field. It obviously takes more time, more inclusion, so it really helps you to think about what would be the most effective decision style there. The other interesting piece of the decision style profile is it offers a level of criteria. Clarity, information, commitment, alignment, time are key criteria that we sometimes don't take into account when we're making a decision. And also what I really appreciated is there is a web app, an app that you can actually use on your phone, on your computer, that actually has a decision-making tree for you to really walk through if you're on your own, if you will, coach yourself on how you would make decisions. So we had that tool embedded and it's embedded within the press time simulation. And so as the simulation moved forward, again, we were able to use it as a way to immediately engage these millennials. Now, another organization, as I've been able to fortunately work with a few financial institutions, used it in a blending learning approach, a 6 to 8 month engagement, where they actually use the change style indicator, the decision style profile, the press time simulation. A global company, senior vice presidents from 15 plus countries, language, function, culture, gender, all of that was diverse and challenging. You were on a team of 8. And you had maybe 50 total, but maybe 5, 6, 7 teams of 8. I'm finishing up one right now, actually. But these teams in this global company were charged with solving an organizational challenge. They had to come together as a team. They didn't really know each other, though they had the same banner of the same organization. So they had to learn how to influence, learn how to communicate, create a communication strategy. And what was amazing or nice to see is right on the first piece of the blended learning, you have that face-to-face, for those that are familiar with that whole blended learning process. And then 6 months later, you have another face-to-face, or if you might have a multiple face-to-face within that. But between the face-to-face, you have virtual communication, virtual meetings, assignments, assessments. And so we used 360 assessments. Each one has an executive coach. Each individual's SVP has an executive coach. But the first face-to-face uses the press time simulation to immediately cement the team as they understand quickly the preferences and behaviors of their team members that they're going to be working with over the next 6 to 8 months. It helps them set expectations about interpersonal working norms, how they're going to make agreements around sharing information, conflict, decision-making. All of that is available. And so the opportunity of having them work as a team to come up with a real solution with a sponsor and then make a formal presentation that's recorded and then distributed globally was very, very powerful. And the press time simulation was helpful for the coach because they could reflect 6 months prior. As I said, remember in that press time simulation when you did? Oh yeah, how can I forget that? You know, and we've even videotaped the press time simulation, so you get to actually watch their behavior on videotape. So a lot of different options, but it really set us up for, and has set us up for success with this particular client that we've worked with for now 5 years. So I highly encourage you to have some fun with press time among the other assessments. It's a great tool, a great simulation, and it really does work. I can attest to that over the last 20 years that I've been able to use it. And so that's the press time simulation. That's the change navigator, change style indicator, influence style indicator, decision style profile, this very engaging computerized simulation. All of that collectively, even with, say, a relational map, really is a powerful way that these organizations have taken advantage and really moved from obviously theoretical ideas or talking head to real-time immediate behavioral application. So those are the stories that we had planned to share with you here and now. I really want to, welcome you if you have been tapped with curiosity to maybe think through, maybe there's something that you're interested in, or maybe that you're wanting to kind of address. Me and my group, we've been fortunate to work with obviously thousands of organizations, been on the ground in 25 countries, and really enjoy the challenge, whatever that is, whatever organization we're faced with, from the CEO to the front line, 2/3 of the Fortune 100. It's a lot of fun for us, but we will work with just about any organization that is obviously out there. So please don't hesitate to reach out, or if you'd like to get certified in the assessments and the tools. But it's a lot of fun. At least I have a lot of fun, and I hope you will too. So, Jason, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you for sharing the great stories that you did today. We do have a number of questions that came in while you were talking, so I'll start to go through some of those. And the first one I think you would be good to answer, and the question is, how do you determine which assessment is the right one to use with a client?
That's a very popular question. I immediately go to, well, what is your desired outcome? Is there a business need that is driving this conversation? Is there something that this particular audience, these leaders, are in a deficit, or that they are building upon an existing strength? So I need to get a little more information to understand, just like I would with a particular 360, say the emotional intelligence assessment, and then combining those two to find a better fit. So I'd have to do a little more intel research to uncover that. But what would be success 6 months after we did this intervention? What would that look like? And that would then drive me to better assess what would be the better assessment to use.
Okay, good response. The next question I'm seeing might build on that a little bit. It's asking about how long does it take to complete the assessments, and are they the same amount of time? So you talked about the change style, the influence style indicator, the decision-making profile. So what I'm seeing, David, is that usually the change style and the influence style are maybe about 15 minutes. Is what I kind of get for feedback and my own experience, and the decision style profile takes a little bit longer because there's some situations you have to actually read through before you answer. So I'd say that one's closer to maybe 25 minutes or so. Have you experienced anything different or had more client feedback around the timing?
No, that's a good assessment, Jason. I would definitely agree with that, and I think there are some assessments that are phenomenal out there, but they take too long. I remember the CPI, or the California Psychological Inventory. It's a powerful instrument out there, but it's very, very long to take. And so what's helpful with these particular tools that I like so much is that they are clear, easy to take. They're in different languages. And maybe, if that is a challenge, it maybe take a few more minutes if there's some hiccup there, but it's really within 20 minutes. I mean, the change style indicator, 20 items, and you're thinking, well, is it really valid? Absolutely it is. And because the questions have been so fine-tuned, it's got amazing face validity. It's easy to understand. So the influence style indicator, the same. Decision style profile, the same. So the length is usually not an obstacle. They can take it ahead of time. There's even the ability to take these in hard copy live in the moment, especially for maybe those that didn't take it or were added late. Or maybe you prefer to do that and work through the results immediately. So a lot of options here.
Interesting. You just mentioned the hard copy format, and we did have a question about that. Maybe it spawned from when you're talking about the change navigator, but when is it more appropriate to take the assessment online versus hard copy? Do you have any insight you can share on that?
Yes, that's a very, very great, powerful question, because everything seems to be, well, let's just do it online and then get your results, and then just email the results to someone, and then they'll read them, and then they'll know them. And that's great in theory, but as we know, perhaps in reality, you really have to process the results. And so you have to have a debrief or a dedicated time for people to really fully understand what the messages are. If you have that time, and that's where you would want to have the assessment taken online ahead of time, maybe hold off on the results or email. There's a lot of different options here, and I don't want to say there's one best way. It's also culturally sensitive. There might be some survey fatigue within an organization or a certain preference there. But to answer that question more directly, the Change Navigator is really intended to be processed with people, for you to get live, immediate feedback, for you to take the assessment, hard copy, ideally, right in front of you, to think through who are the key stakeholders that I need to influence. What are the components of this change that are challenging me, the characteristics that are continuing to keep me up at night, the pain that I'm experiencing, the frustration. And then as you write it literally versus taking it online, these different assessments, writing it, you get to actually reflect on your results. So if you have more time to go into a deeper dive, having it in hard copy form is very, very powerful. So sometimes what I've done in the past is I will have them take the assessment live, because I have a very focused audience, and from there they'll be able to score the assessments themselves. It's pretty straightforward. It's like maybe 99% have no problem scoring it, and maybe there's that 1% that a partner will help them figure it out, because it's very clear, very straightforward. And then using that, they'll be able to go back and forth and look at their actual questions. When you take it online, we go right to the report. Now, the benefit of the report is there's multiple pages that offer different insights. So there's pros and cons to both. And I just encourage you to really think through what is your long-term strategy with how you will use the results going forward. I hope that helps.
Yeah, good explanation there. Next question I see, David, is around the assessments, and are they validated assessments, and is there norm data? So I can start by saying that yes, they are validated assessments. In fact, all of the assessments that you'll find at multi-health systems are scientifically validated assessments. There's actually norm data aligned with these assessments as well that you can have access to either through reports or through facilitator guides, and that's a great opportunity for you to compare the results against how other people responded and taking that. Anything you'd want to add there, David, about validated assessments or the norm data?
That's a very, very important question, because there's so much out there now on the web. Obviously, you can take assessments for free or copycat versions, and you say, well, I kind of got a general sense. But you may get a mixed message or a misinterpretation, and you're really running the risk of having people who take the assessment or take maybe a free or alternative assessment that's not fully validated, that is reliable, to really come to some false conclusions. And I prefer, obviously, only use really the ones that are valid and are reliable, that I can trust, that actually have a database attached to it, that have gone through the rigor to make sure that when we're talking from legitimacy. We're not talking theoretical. What is the color of the month or the animal that you might be representative? I mean, it's really getting into literal preferences based on literal research that's been validated. So I highly encourage you to really think about that. That's where MHS, I believe, does stand out globally, because they don't compromise in that area.
Great, thanks for the additional commentary there. Another question I'm seeing is around how long does it take to get certified, and do I have to get certified in all of the assessments you've talked about today? I think I can help answer this one, David. I know that you do not have to get certified in all of the assessments. For some of the examples David used where it was just the change style indicator, you would just have to get certified in that specific assessment. Only when you're going to use a battery of assessments or put more than one together is when you would have to get certified in all of those. In terms of the length of time, that may vary based on how an individual works through some self-paced learning, because that's how some of these are structured for the certification with the ones that David talked about today. So change style, influence style, decision making, those are based on how you work through online modules, and then you're also given a phone call with a master trainer at the end of going through those modules. So then you can talk about any questions you had as you were going through the learning, or you can ask for best practices, describe the situation, how you want to implement that maybe in your organization. and ask someone like David, how have you done this in the past? Maybe what have you seen come up as roadblocks? What do I need to be prepared for? So you have all of the access you need in terms of the assessment as well as support to then go ahead and deliver that program internally. The only one that does take more time in terms of the assessment for certification is the EQI 2.0. So the emotional intelligence assessment is more of a 1.5 to 2 day program where, again, there's a blended mix online learning as well as class participation there though too. So that's the reason why that one takes a little bit longer for certification.
And I will add to that, Jason, that the support materials are well thought out. The slides, the facilitator guide, the support is available. Obviously, it's pretty clear and straightforward, but at the same time, to leverage, say, the change style indicator. What does a horseshoe mean? How do you engage with the different activities that you can make it really come alive? There's a lot available that's really been thought through over the last few decades to make this a great set of tools.
Great. Well, thank you for all the questions to everyone, and we've got one more here, David. I'll let you handle this one. The question is around common patterns and characteristics that you see or maybe that you observed that make the companies you talked about today, what you said, success stories. Any background you can provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a willingness to take a risk, a sponsor that is willing to see it through, that is able to secure the resources, that are able to influence individuals within the organization to engage and participate is a critical one. No matter how amazing and wonderful it is to get people aligned and committed and on board is critical. Maybe having them obviously take the assessment, having conversations, many conversations before you go large, if you will. That's what I've seen them do, and then people start having a kind of a reflective buzz and a conversation, and they start immediately making connections to reality and situations, and then the conversation kind of catches fire. And so that's how I've seen it kind of play out, and then people get behind it because they can see the end result. It's not just something you go to, it's something that has the key application component to it. But having that key sponsor or sponsors that can also see it, they're able to assess the problem and here's a solution, and then that they rally behind that with, again, more resources, usually is what leads to a successful outcome.
Great, thank you. Well, we only have about a minute or two left, so as you see the map that's there now, if there's any questions that you have about multi-health systems assessments or simulations that we've talked about today, you can see that there's an individual that you can reach out to with the states that are provided on the map. And once again, we thank you for your time. We look forward to hearing from you in the future, and everyone have a great rest of the day.